Okay, welcome everyone to our annual Career Transitions in Industry panel for UW Math. We have some great panelists here today from a bunch of different aspects of industry who all have some ties to UW, so it has a kind of an extra special feel to it. So yeah, today we have these four speakers. Why don't we? Okay, so the process that we're going to go through here is, first, we're going to spend some time going around through all of our speakers. We'll have them speak a little bit about who they are, what their current position is, and their affiliation with UW. After that, we are going to go back through our candidates one more time and kind of talk about recommendations and ideas that people have for good advice for transitioning to industry. After that, we are going to, oh gosh, now I've forgotten my schedule. Oh, right. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion just kind of about these different ideas and try to synthesize everything. And then finally, we're going to open the floor up to your questions, so you can kind of respond to what the panelists have been saying and hopefully get some of your questions, your burning questions answered. Okay, so that's kind of how we're going to do things. Why don't we get things started with our first panelist, Allison Danes. Allison, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, so I graduated from UW's PhD program in 2014. My advisor was William Stein, and my research area is computational algebraic number theory. And so what I tell my parents is that I counted how many times you could smush one thing onto another. So I looked at the degree of parameterization of an elliptic curve by a Shimura curve, which is a generalization of a modular curve, and none of this matters in real life. It just doesn't. But it's cool and it's interesting, and I got to study it, so that was awesome. So now I'm down in San Diego, and today is like the one day it's raining from all winter. So originally I was going to be sitting out on our patio and it was going to be sunny and there would be palm trees. And this would actually be at my building and it's absolutely gorgeous, except it's raining. So I'm in our little overflow office. So yeah, it's stark. But my job title here is I'm a research staff member, and I probably have the least industry job ever. So it turns out that like all pure math actually has like real world applications, and the US government is interested in those. But if you don't want to work at the NSA, like they do shorter term and more specialized projects, whereas they have some think tanks, and CCR La Jolla is one of these, where they pay us to solve longer term problems that just need like more research that they don't expect to be solved in 1 or possibly even 10 years. So that's what I do. The breakdown is I'm allowed to spend about 50% of my time on my own research, and then I spend about 50% of my time on work research, but I get to pick any of the work problems. They don't tell you what to do. It's a very, very flat structure. So there's the director, the deputy director, and then everyone else is just a research staff member. And yeah, so I still get to do pure math. I still tend to do like a lot of algebra, but honestly, every single piece of math that I use or that I learned at UW has been useful, including real analysis, and which was my nemesis my first year. So I've even had to use that, which has been very, very cool. And yeah, so basically, I can't talk about that 50% of work a ton, but I can say that we do use every single type of math. And if you can imagine that the NSA is interested, then you can imagine that we're interested too.
Wonderful. Thank you, Allison. For our next panelist, we have Henry Kvinge.
Hello. So yeah, my name's Henry Kavingy. I think unlike maybe some of our other panelists, I was actually an undergraduate at UW, and I graduated back in 2011, so a long time ago. And during that time, I actually did like a undergraduate honors thesis. I don't know what they called it with Sarah, which was cool. I went on to go to UC Davis and work kind of at the intersection of representation theory, algebraic combinatorics and category theory, which was great. But following that, I decided that I wanted to have a little more freedom in where I lived and a few more opportunities. I didn't really get much of a chance to collaborate with folks outside of those narrow disciplines when I was a graduate student. So I started thinking, I mean, this was kind of around the time of a little after the big data science wave was crashing on many different areas of study. And I thought, well, this would be interesting. Maybe I can apply math in this way. So went off, did a postdoc at Colorado State, where I was building some algorithms underlying single pixel cameras with compressive sensing, which I knew nothing about starting the postdoc, but they looked at my background and said, well, you look like you could probably pick things up quick. And that was really interesting, gotten interested in how mathematical frameworks, algebra, geometry can actually inform some of the ways that data science is performed, specifically machine learning. Now I'm a senior data scientist at Pacific Northwest National Lab, just in Seattle. So I work down by the Facebook building, if you know where that is. And I spend my time doing mostly machine learning things, although I did work on a project last year that was sort of at the intersection of so we were using sheaves to better understand immune responses, which was pretty cool. But a broad range of topics. I also use a lot of the math I learned in graduate school. I mean, there's the things you kind of you use on a daily basis that just come from as a graduate student, or someone who has experience in math. You just you get an intuitive sense of linear algebra, for example. That was not something I did research in, but something you just pick up, and I use that every single day. But every once in a while, I get to use facts from group theory, or interesting things from geometry, high dimensional probability theory, things like that. So definitely, I would say, I know that some of my colleagues say they don't use the math they learned in graduate school anymore. I would say I do. It's just not as obvious how I use it.
Very good. Welcome, Henry. Our next speaker is Kellie Mcphee.
Hi, everyone. So I'm a recent enough grad that I know some of your faces, but definitely not all. I finished my PhD at UW in the end of the summer of 2019. So it's been a year and a half or so, maybe closer to 2 years now. I'm not sure. And I studied with Dima Drusviatsky, who, so our primary focus was both optimization, which in a way set me up well because optimization is sort of inherently a bit more applied than some of the other math disciplines that people study at UW. That said, I was doing very theoretical work for my PhD. So we were looking at, kind of very high level, like generic properties of algorithms and convergence rates of those algorithms and things like that. But it naturally had a lot of ties to computer science and statistics. So I also spent quite a bit of time while I was at UW taking classes in other departments. So I did do a master's in statistics as well while I was there. And I also did the advanced data science option with my PhD. And those are both really great exposure for me. It did keep me quite busy, but it was, I kind of knew that I wanted to go into industry. And so that set me up really well. And I'm now working at Microsoft as a data scientist. And because I had done a pretty good job of setting myself up well to look good for applications and had planned well ahead to do that, I actually ended up getting directly recruited for the job that I now have. So there's a standard pipeline where people apply. You can apply to kind of generic, I just recently finished school jobs at companies like Microsoft, and they'll then kind of after the fact, once they determine that you're a quality applicant, they'll try to match you with a group. But I actually got contacted directly by the person who's now my manager based on my LinkedIn profile because they were looking for a very specific set of skills. And I had a lot of those skills, namely optimization, but also a lot of statistics. And my team at Microsoft is very focused on time series analysis and forecasting. We're in the cloud supply chain world, so it's very businessy in supply chain, but it is a reasonable sized data science team within there. And it's been really cool because I do get to use some of my optimization expertise in a very different way, I would say, than I did my research, but a lot of the knowledge and kind of big picture understanding that I got from my degree and the classes I took has been really helpful. So that's, yeah, I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Welcome back, Kellie. And last but not least, we have our very own Harish Ramadas.
Thanks, Nico. Hi, my name's Harish. As Nico said, I graduated from the UW PhD program back in 2017. I worked with Thomas Rothfuss on discrete optimization, and I'd also done a little bit of work in probability. And so about a couple of years into my PhD, I figured out, like a lot of other people and maybe you guys as well, that I wanted to get a job in industry. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And so I basically ended up, trying to learn as much as I could about the world in general, took lots of classes like Kellie did, maybe a little less directed. And eventually I ended up working at a company called Palantir. It's a software company based in Palo Alto, because they advertised this role that was supposed to be like this math consultant. And I thought that seemed really cool because that would give me the chance to learn a lot about the world, work with multiple different customers and in different industries. So what actually ended up happening was that there was way, way, way less math than had been advertised in the job, and the company underwent a huge culture shift. And so I just ended up learning a lot about the world, but very little about math, or with very few opportunities to apply, not even grad school level math, but even like undergrad or like high school level math. And so it was fun while it lasted, because I got to fly across the country all the time and get business class upgrades and meet with customers and talk fancy with them and use a corporate card and all that good stuff. But the biggest thing that job really gave me was an introduction to this wonderful field called bioinformatics, which is basically a broad umbrella term for the applications of computer science, statistics, math, you name it, to problems in biology and improving human health care. This was because I worked a lot with the NIH, which was a customer of Palantir. And so thankfully, a few months ago, I got a new job. This time my job title is officially bioinformatics scientist. It's at an early cancer detection company called Grail, based in Menlo Park in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so what Grail does is we use liquid biopsy, so literally a blood draw, to detect whether or not a patient has cancer, and if the patient has a tumor sitting somewhere, where in the body it's located, because these tumors are shedding dead cells into the bloodstream all the time. There's DNA fragments floating around in there, and so we sequence those fragments, and then we apply machine learning to as an early cancer detection test. So I'm on the machine learning team at Grail. It's been super cool, super exciting, and I'm excited to share that, my thoughts on bioinformatics to you guys here today.
Very cool. As I promised, a bunch of very cool people doing very cool things. For our next segment, I'm going to hand things off to Sarah, and she's going to let you talk a little bit about advice.
Hey, thank you, Nico. Thanks, everybody. That was a great introduction. So keeping an eye on time, I would say, why don't we go back through reverse order? And why don't you say, maybe just give us like 2 or 3 minutes worth, if you could, of advice for students who are thinking about maybe doing a career like yours down the road. What would you recommend for them as their next steps and sort of something to keep in mind for the future? Harish, will you go first?
Sure. So take lots of classes. Grad school is literally the one time in your lives when you think you're busy now, wait till you actually get a job in industry. you're geographically, at like such an amazing university, you can learn about literally everything under the sun from the best people in the world. So just do it. And I really wish I had done so, with sort of slightly more systematically than I did. I mean, I took random classes in things like music and botany and, things that I love, but not so much things that, would have served me well in terms of my career. And so, now I'm just learning all these things on the fly, things like statistics, which isn't considered a very hot subject. Everyone wants to do deep learning, machine learning, AI, whatever you call it. But basic things like statistics, computational biology, basic computer science algorithms, I think would serve you very well. And, consider, even if you're early enough in your PhD, you haven't picked an advisor yet, trying to, get a co-advising arrangement with someone in a more applied department. I know those people around my time who were doing that sort of thing. So yeah, you're in a great place. Use all the opportunities. Yeah, that's all.
I love that advice. That's awesome. Okay, Kellie, would you be next on advice?
Yeah, I think if I followed the order correctly, that means I'm next. I would echo a lot of what Harish said. There's a lot of really awesome classes that you can take at the UW. Don't be afraid to take the undergrad versions of classes if you feel like you don't have a strong background in something. Some of them can be challenging to get into because there's really high demand, but grad students get to register first. And so you might just need to have a conversation with the professor ahead of time about why you're taking it and kind of show that you're committed. The grad versions of certain classes can be quite challenging. So that's just something to be aware of. For example, I took a databases class that was a grad level CS databases class as part of the advanced data science option. And it was really great. I learned a ton, but I felt very in over my head for a lot of the time. And I learned a lot of things that subsequently it might have gone a little too deep for what I needed. So judge that appropriately for yourself. I would echo also what Harish said, that statistics super critical. You might not hear about people getting jobs as a statistician, but it's so fundamental to so many aspects of data science, machine learning, all of those things. So getting some basic statistics and some practice on statistical projects will really serve you well. In particular, just from my experience, spending a lot of time now working with time series and forecasting, I don't think that's something that gets talked about very much, but it's a really desired thing in industry because every company wants to predict like how much demand there's going to be for whatever they're making, and there's a lot of business decisions that are based off of that. So I would encourage you to think about that. And then definitely get some coding experience. If you're interested in a data science role, R and Python are definitely the languages that you want to go to. So I would recommend probably Python is your number one choice. It's the most versatile. And whether you want to go more of an engineering route or more of a traditional data science, I don't think that's really a thing. Python is pretty universal. You can use it in a lot of different roles. R is really helpful for statistics. If you're working on applied statistics kind of projects, you might run into that a lot. But I find it's pretty easy to go back and forth between the two. So I would say just pick one and get comfortable manipulating data in it and running a lot of basic models and things like that.
Awesome. That's really, really great advice. All right, so Henry, you're up next.
Great. So I agree pretty much with what all of my co-panelists said, and I'll add a few things I jotted down while they were talking. So the first thing I'd just like to echo is definitely get some experience programming. I don't think that needs to be, I mean, it's helpful sometimes if you take it as a course, but if you're not able to because of your schedule or get into them, I know the CS courses are pretty popular these days at some universities, then you definitely can do it on your own. I mean, plenty of people do. The kind of skills I think that they look for in interviews, like there's thousands and thousands of places online you can kind of see where, roles that require software engineering type roles, what they're looking for specifically. And lots of resources for that. I'd say that what I would think is good is to have a project that you can point to, especially if you have open source code, get that GitHub page up with examples of projects. And for the interviewing process in particular for industry, have that story ready, that quick few sentence thing about what you did, why it was important, why it showcases skills that, would make you a good employee, things like that. Is really helpful if you can start thinking about that ahead of time, because I started doing it during the interviewing process, and like trying to push out a project like that you can do it, but it's not so fun. On the topic of projects, I think that one thing that I wished I would have done and didn't do, like there's lots of labs around universities that need people that have the skills of a mathematician, and lots of times what your particular area of research won't match up with exactly what they need, and that's okay. They need someone to help, like biology labs. I actually worked very briefly. I wish I would have got involved a lot earlier, helping with the data science side of a agriculture lab, which was interesting. I knew nothing about agriculture, but UC Davis is, of course, in farm country. So, and as a consequence, I had a GitHub page. It was kind of simple things I was doing, but I could point to it and say, hey, I could go work with a bunch of people that came from a different background from me and provide some value to their project. That kind of brings me to like working with teams. I think that in graduate school, you don't necessarily see the benefit of being good at like things like mentoring, organizing, working with people that you can sometimes see in industry. And so some of you might be pleasantly surprised to be like, wow, I never really knew that this was something that could really help me a lot in my work life, because you don't see it quite as much when we're just because of the structure of maybe graduate school. But thinking about those skills important. And my final thing is, as you approach graduation, learning how to craft that story of what your skill set is critical. So, and that's a big discovery process. As a graduate student, you sort of learn, if you're like applying to postdocs, for example, you learn like, I'm a specialist in this area, and that's what I do. If you're going to industry, that's not the skills you're going to be selling. You're going to be selling that, you have, strong overall math background. You're good at problem solving. Someone can give you a really hard problem, and you can go home and figure out how to at least approach it and break it down and things like that. And I didn't really ever think about those types of things. And so it was a process I had to go through. I think everyone has to go through that goes through the interviewing process. And just being ready and starting to digest that early makes it a lot less painful than doing it on the fly when you're frantically searching for a job.
That's awesome advice. Great. So this is really working very nicely. We have one more panelist who will give us her advice, and then we'll go through it back one more time just for a few comments in case you get other panelists want to say a little more. So Allison, are you up next?
I think so. So I would really reiterate like having a project up on GitHub. So my job is, compared to the other panelists, like I'm almost academia. So when people come in, they give math talks, and we expect them to just be like really smart, and we can't tell you what we do. So if you're really smart, then we just know that we can train you. But we also really want the people skills, and we're looking for people we can work with. So there have definitely been people we've passed over just because they weren't easy to even interview. But outside of those two things, which I think are kind of universal in industry, the one thing that no one's mentioned are internships. So that really helped me. So at my company, we do we have a summer program called SCAMP. And it's an acronym, and the original meaning is lost to time, but we now call it Summer Camp for Adult Mathematicians Program. But we have a couple positions for undergrads who've possibly done the Director's Summer Program at the NSA before. So that's how I got in, or like a few grad students and postdocs each summer. And then it's mostly tenured professors actually who come in for the summer, and we bring about 40 people in, and we work on just really hard problems all summer. So internships like that You can see if you actually want an industry job and if you're a good fit. And it also kind of just gets your foot in the door so we know who you are as well. It also really helped that I did an internship at Microsoft Research when I was in grad school as well. So I could tell kind of what that type of work environment was also like. So there's two aspects to industry. There's getting a job in it, but there's also making sure that it's a good fit for you as well. So an internship can really help with that. But other than that, I really agree with all the comments that I've heard so far. I mean, whether you're in academia or industry, you just, when you're looking for a job, you just need to be very polished, but you need to be polished for that specific niche. So when people come to us and half of their CV is on their teaching record, I mean, okay, but you're not going to do a lot of teaching in my position. But if you're showing me, you know, the math that you took from very high level math to an algorithm, I don't care what area it's in. Now we're talking.
Super. Okay, so panelists, sometimes when you hear other people's advice and you say, oh, that just made me think of one more thing. So let me open it up to the panelists just for a couple minutes. Is there anything else you want to add that you were reminded of as we went through that? Just speak up. I won't call on you in order.
Well, I'll just echo Allison's comment that internships are really useful. I actually did 2 different ones over 2 different summers during my time at UW that were quite different from one another. And that was really helpful for me just to have some feelers for what I liked and didn't like, and also to get that experience. So definitely +1 for internships.
Henry, it looked like you had unmuted too.
Yeah, I was thinking, I don't remember who reminded me of it, but I think that, you know, exploring and finding that fit, you know, just be ready. If you don't know exactly, I mean, sometimes people know exactly what they want to do in industry. They have a particular area of industry targeted, and that's great. For some people, there's an exploratory aspect to it. And I would say, like, when you get to that time to start doing that interview process, you know, it's an interview for both you and them, right? You're also interviewing them. And I think that too often people, when they start interviewing, are very like careful, like, oh, do I actually qualify for this? And just, I would say, interview as much as you can. It's a great skill to be able to interview well, and it's something you learn through practice anyway. So don't be afraid to just interview and try lots of things and see what has a culture that fits, and you know, usually can tell during the interview whether it's the kind of place you want to spend your time.
In addition to interviewing a lot, as much as you can, also learn to cope with rejection. Unless you're very lucky, you will need to deal with lots and lots and lots of rejection. Just saying.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that this may be changing, but it used to be the case in industry where they didn't really, a lot of folks in industry that didn't come from math didn't really know what to do with mathematicians. They didn't know their skill set. So that doesn't necessarily say anything about you if you are rejected. Sometimes yeah, there's lots of other reasons that you're not aware of. So don't take it personally.
Okay, I think that's really good. And I'm going to hand it off to Max Lieblich next to host the questions. But let me point out that there are many students and prospective students here on the call, and there's also faculty on the call. And everybody should feel free to ask questions, okay? Especially those prospective students, feel free to raise your hand and ask the questions too. We want to hear from all parts for the question time. So Max, you want to take it away and moderate the questions?
Yeah. I was thinking about how to have the questions be asked, and it occurs to me that maybe putting them in the chat would be a good mechanism, because I know personally the tiny hand never works for me in Zoom. So if you have a question, please feel free to type it in the chat. Or if we're in the middle, if there's a conversation happening, you know, we're humans, we could talk. But if someone wants to get started with a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. Maybe while that's happening, I'll ask a question just so that there's something going on. I notice, as Sarah just said, we've got current graduate students here, we've got prospective graduate students here, we've got postdocs here, we've got faculty here, and I'm really curious. I know, especially thinking about at the very least, grad students and postdocs, those are two groups of people that might want to go into industry. And I'm wondering what you think. I can imagine there being slightly different paths or different aspects of how one makes a transition from each of those phases into industry. And I wonder if anyone has anything to say about that. And please, while this is happening, if you've got a question, feel free to type it in the chat. Any of the industry people could answer that question, or there's now a question in the chat about internships. Vasily asked, could you speak about internships more? How do I search for them? The only way I've tried so far is putting something like computational biology in LinkedIn, and it doesn't seem to work well.
I know.
Go ahead, Allison.
Oh, I know ours is posted on Math Jobs. And I know by going to conferences in your area, you'll also hear more about this. And hopefully, if you have an advisor, your advisor will also direct you to these.
Yeah, I can speak specifically since you mentioned computational biology. The buzzword that's used a little more and that can mean that's more of an umbrella term is bioinformatics. You can try that as well. But generally speaking, LinkedIn, Indeed, Glassdoor maybe even are good places to look for internships. But at the end of the day, it's a good idea to figure out where you want to apply and sort of, as Allison was saying, I think be a little targeted in your applications to the extent to which it's possible. I agree, given that you've got limited exposure, it's kind of tough. And I just took the approach of, applying far and wide, as Henry was saying, interviewing a lot and getting rejected most of the time. So yeah, you have to find that right balance.
I would just add, like, using your connections where you have them. For me, for example, my advisor was not at all connected really with industry, but she had students, former students who had gone to industry, and through one of them was the only sort of successful attempt I had at an internship, was reaching out directly and saying like, hey, do you guys have internships? And he happened to point me to an internship that wasn't listed on any of the big sites. And so that can sometimes be a good resource.
Yeah, just to add to that, I would encourage people to think about, there's some kind of internships or fellowships over the summer that are somewhere between academia and industry almost. So that's actually what I did for both of mine. The first one was at PNNL, where Henry works. So I don't know if you would totally agree with my characterization this way, but the National Lab, as far as I can tell, is kind of an academic-ish environment. It's definitely somewhere in between, like a big company in a very corporate feel and an academic feel. And I think because of that, and because most of the people there had PhDs or were just very well connected to academia, they were appreciative of that kind of background and more open to it than if you, say, went to one of the big tech companies and looked for a general data science position or something. The other one that I did was actually at UW's eScience Institute. They have a data science for social good summer fellowship program. And so that was similarly like working on very applied projects. And I don't think it's really right to call it industrial, but it was very different than traditional academic work, but it was also kind of associated with the university, and they were specifically looking for students. And in some ways it was a bit researchy. So I would keep your eyes out for opportunities like that if you feel like you don't have maybe a strong resume with a lot of coding experience or projects that would stick out to a recruiter. The other thing I wanted to say for Max's first question was, this might be more directed at postdocs or even more senior grad students, but it's really okay to kind of take a step down in a way if you know what you want to do is to do something different than what you're currently doing. I think there's a mindset, and I know I've gotten stuck in this at points, that you get so far in one discipline that it's like a waste to give some of that up. But if you aren't totally happy with where you're currently at and you want to try something different, it's really going to be worth it. And in the long term, it might just be, you know, a small step down in terms of your title, or maybe not even pay, because we all know what academic pay is like. But it might feel like a step down, or might feel like you're not going to be able to put to full use all of this stuff you've dedicated so much of your life to. But you'll catch up really quickly, and it's okay to take a position or an internship that you might feel in some ways like you're overqualified for, and use that as a stepping stone to the next thing.
Thank you. Those are a lot of really interesting thoughts. I see there's a couple more questions here, and one for Kellie and one for Allison. I think to give Kellie a break, let's do the question to Allison and the question to Kellie. So Nico is curious about something that Allison said about turning higher math into an algorithm that came up in your remarks a few minutes ago. And he's kind of curious of whether you can give an example of something of that kind where higher math gets turned into an algorithm.
So coming from like either number theory or algebraic geometry, let's say that you have a family of examples for doing a thing. And even if it's pretty abstract, usually you can hone in on something that you can actually like compute. So, but getting from that computation down to say Python, or even getting it at like the sage/magma level, can take a bit more math. So if you can show how you can go from like the series of examples to generalizing them and writing some code to do this, that's the type of thing. So we frequently do this in my job. And then my job is normally just like understanding the math, getting it down to the Python level, and then I hand it off to someone else who like codes it up in C. Does that make sense? I'm trying to be slightly vague because I can't give you examples from my work, and I also just don't know your mathematical background.
That was a great answer. That was really
That was perfect. Yeah, thank you.
Let me get to the question to Kellie, and then Sarah has a good question. So Ravil is asking a sort of technical UW question of Kellie. How do you get a master's degree in stats at UW as a PhD student in math? Do you need to apply for the program separately, or just take a special exam at the statistics department?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you do actually officially have to get admitted to the master's program. So there's some kind of timing constraints here because they only accept applications once a year and approve them once a year. So I would encourage you to be kind of mindful of that. You would need to get admitted to start in the fall, and then take an exam at the end of the year. There's an exam in June at the end of spring quarter that you need to pass to finish. So just maybe look into that more. I'm happy to talk more with anyone who's interested or to share the info on that. But you do need to actually apply and get approved. What I would say is that's quite easy. I shouldn't say quite easy, it becomes much easier if you've already taken some classes in the stats department at that point and proven yourself and shown that you're committed to it. You can have, maybe a professor in the stats department write you a recommendation, and they know you, and your odds are going to be a lot higher of getting in. So anyone can sign up to take those classes, but if you do want to get the master's degree, then you do need to apply.
Thank you for that. Sarah is asking, since Kellie brought up the subject of academic salaries, Sarah's wondering what kind of pay an entry-level PhD person can expect. And this, I imagine, will be different for different people on this panel, so it'd be helpful to hear multiple answers to this.
Depends on the industry, I think, unfortunately.
So I know in my industry, or if you go say to like NSA, then it's going to start like low 6 digits. That being said, I've lost some friends to Google, and then you can maybe just triple that.
Probably not at an entry level though.
Probably not at an entry level, but like maybe a year or two out of a PhD.
Yeah, so I'm in tech, and I'm trying to think how to word this. It depends on your experience coming in, because there's within any company, there's a lot of different levels. So there's like a true entry level, and then there's like an intermediate level, and then there's a senior level. So I got hired in at Microsoft at the intermediate level because I had a degree and I had quite a bit of, academic experience, but I didn't have industry experience that would promote you to senior. So that it varies a lot company to company, but I think if you have a math degree, but you have very little kind of coding and applied experience, you might have to come in at even the lower entry level. If you do have a good combination of the academic and applied experience through internships, through projects, all the stuff we've talked about, then you'd probably be coming in at that second level. And it varies by company how they do compensation. I would really recommend looking on Glassdoor at any specific companies you're interested in to try to find out what is fair for that company when you're actually evaluating that specific company. There's also a lot of benefits and bonuses and things that are like a little bit less straightforward to account for than just a single figure. So that's something I would caution people as well. So I have a base pay, and then I have stock, I had a signing bonus, and I have a yearly bonus if I'm doing well, and you might get promoted along the way. So it becomes a complex picture pretty quickly. But I would say definitely 6 figures, probably 100 to 150 is where I would expect most people to come in tech.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with the figure Kelly gave in terms of base salary, and there's all these other components that you have to be aware of. With equity, it's really hard to value if you're joining a company that's not public yet. So it's a bit of a gamble. I would recommend looking at this link that I shared in the chat, levels.fyi. It gives a sort of good comparison of what to expect. I would say if you want to, a base, so straight with the PhD, I've heard of people getting hired around L4 at Google, but it again, as Kelly said, varies depending on your level of experience. It could be lower or higher as well. And it's going to depend on where you're working. San Francisco Bay Area and New York, the rents are astronomical. I know they're high in Seattle as well, but it's just even worse over here. And so the pay is usually higher as well.
Yeah, so since National Labs got brought up, National Labs sit a little bit below industry usually, and then they obviously don't have the stocks and things like that. So as someone said earlier, that National Labs are kind of in between academia and industry, and the pay kind of sits there as well. I'm not involved in hiring, so I don't know off the top of my head, but I would say the lower end of the figure, that the range that was given, are maybe like coming onto a national lab with some sort of experience, not coming on as a postdoc or something like that.
Thank you. So yeah, for those of our graduates who end up in industry, you can see that your starting salary will be approximately that of most full professors at the UW. So we greatly appreciate your generous donations in the future. I believe we're about out of time for the question session, if I've understood Sarah's schedule.
I think actually we can finish up the ones in the chat. Feel free to take 5 more minutes, and then we'll do a roundup, everybody, okay?
Sounds great. So there's 3 more questions here, if that's okay, Sarah. That sounds all right. Okay, great. So the first one is from Jordan Weaver, and her question is, for the data science route, do you have specific recommendations of classes to take? Any classes in addition to the ones that are already part of our data science option, things like that?
I mean, I would, if you guys don't mind me throwing out a few ideas, I think that data science, machine learning is changing so fast that you can, and as a mathematician, you can actually you're not that far from being able to kind of get involved in it. So I would say rather than taking classes or beyond taking classes, maybe like starting to read blog posts on some of the most recent developments and things like that. There's a lot of really good, accessible things like blogs on the internet. It's just a matter of finding them really, that kind of cover like what is the hottest trend. And of course, knowing those buzzwords never hurts you if you're looking for one of those roles either.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just want to mention statistical inference, both quarters of it. Kellie's nodding.
Yeah, that is one of the ones, I think the optional ones for the data science option. I think all of those, there's 5 or 6 listed in the data science option are really great. And I would maybe kind of build off of that with similar topics. So in my experience, those are all really great foundational topics to be comfortable with. But those alone might not be sufficient. So I would kind of shop around for classes that seem to be touching on some similar topics, but maybe are going more in depth into certain things or slightly more advanced statistical techniques. But the data science can be very big and it's really a buzzword in some ways, and there's not a very well defined set of specializations within that, or it just can be like a lot. It can feel like you need to know everything because it is a little bit of so many different things. And I would encourage you not to stress about that too much. You want some foundations in computer science and statistics and machine learning, maybe optimization, because I care about that a lot. Throw that in there. You don't need that, but that's another fun bonus maybe. But then just depending on what you like and what you're interested in, I would try to delve deep into certain aspects of that.
Anyone else want to add to these already wonderful answers? In that case, why don't we move on to the next question? Vasily is curious about advice for international students regarding internships and other career opportunities. How much of what we're saying generalizes away from the United States?
So I'm not an international student, but I grew up in India, so I have a lot of friends who've been in similar situations. And I think if you're looking for jobs in the US or building a career in the US as an international student, unfortunately, you'll have to take on a sort of slightly more conservative risk profile. And the larger companies in general have the infrastructure in place and are much more open to the idea of H-1B visa sponsorships, for example, than smaller companies, and they would certainly look at your application with a much more open mind. And it's really unfortunate because, you know, very good people get totally overlooked for this reason. But I would recommend focusing on larger, more established companies.
Thank you for that. The third question is from a prospective student. This is a very interesting one. You're just starting, but you think you might want to go into industry or government or something like that. To what extent should this be factored into your decision about what you do, how you choose an advisor, what field you work in? How much should you let what you think is attractive to companies when you're starting your program drive what you do while you're in your program? Keeping in mind that the program could last for 5 years.
I have some thoughts about this. So like I said, I did research in optimization, which is maybe a little bit more naturally inclined towards industry jobs. But I think with any area of math, you can choose to do it in a way that's really going to set you up well. So I know Sarah, for example, really encourages students to do computational elements in their research, which is going to be extremely helpful to you. And I think in maybe not all, but most disciplines of math, you can find a way to incorporate something computational into your research. if you're genuinely totally torn between two, and you would be equally happy doing research in them, then it's a fine idea to choose based on future jobs. But you should do it is a long process, like Max was saying, so you should be doing something that you're enjoying day to day and not just slogging through to get to the end result. If you care more about the industry job, then frankly, I wouldn't go to grad school. I would just get an industry job and use those 5 years to accelerate your career within industry. There's some caveats there, but I just, I wouldn't, if you're going to grad school, I would hope that a large portion of it is because you love the math and you love the process. And so don't feel like you need to sacrifice that. There's ways to tailor your research program to learn a lot of these skills that we have been talking about.
I really just want to second that. And it depends which area of industry you're interested in going into. I would say, like, if you're interested in something in the government, we don't care. We'll train you. Just show us you can do math and it's good. And then also, like, if you're torn between two areas, a thing that I was given really good advice on early on is to just, like, make sure you click with your advisor. If you pick a really good advisor or someone you click with, it's going to be a joy to work with them. And just, like, see how they've worked with their previous grad students, if they have any, and take that into consideration as well.
This has been so great. Before I hand it back to Sarah, I just want to say how awesome this is. And this has been so wonderful, a great learning experience for me. And I'd just like to thank Sarah for doing this, for getting this going. I really appreciate that. Sarah, I think you're muted.
Yeah.
Oh, you missed the most important thing I said, which is thanks actually so much for doing this for all of you guys too. Actually, the speakers did such a great job, and I love the questions too. Actually, every year it's a little different, and every perspective adds a little something. So I wish I could just take the big union of all the last 10 years that we've been doing this and share it with everybody. And this is the first time we're recording this, so I'm really excited about putting this up on my new YouTube channel. So the tradition here is at the end of one of these talks, I'd like to ask everybody to put a little something out there. What should we remember? So what is the most important thing that you learned today? And let's just review it. A good way to do that would be to put the most important thing you learned in the chat. So we'll have it written down, and that will also be part of the YouTube page. So everybody has to do it, even the speakers. You have to put something in the chat. What did you learn? Good. Learn some statistics, yeah. And I love nothing better than the book, The Cartoon Guide to Statistics, as a place to start, I must say. Great, so definitely consider taking some classes outside of math. I think that's a huge, huge thing to do. Look for internship opportunities. Yeah, and don't look in June for internship opportunities. I don't know if it came up, but generally those opportunities, you have to look in the fall. So start thinking about it in September this coming year, where you're gonna apply. Great, learn some coding skills, absolutely. I always think that if you're a mathematician who doesn't code, it's on par with running a marathon without shoes. Yes, some people can do it, but most of us benefit from shoes. And GitHub, actually, this is the first time GitHub has come up by multiple people. I think that's neat, and it's always interesting to see those trends. And I recently had a student who had stuff posted on GitHub. And when I showed my husband his application, my husband works at Microsoft and Amazon now, but he did an interesting thing. He just opened up all the links on this person's CV, every single link, opened up everything on GitHub, looked at all the code. That was a surprise to me. That's how he looks at an application. Explore different classes too. Actually, I was surprised that Harish said he took so many different kinds of classes. I got to take more classes outside of math. There's really great opportunities in government. Yes, there are. And actually, that's my focus this year. I went to an interesting NSF panel a couple of years ago where they started talking about mathematicians in government. And it was a school on the East Coast that was doing a presentation. And I had not really clicked on that. But we need to do more. Actually, that's particularly why I wanted to invite Henry to be on this panel. And actually, Alyson sort of works at a government company related to government as well. So that was actually part of the focus this year. So thanks guys for representing that side. Take advantage of UW by learning from any class that you have good. And I noted that too, statistical inference, yeah, definitely. And Alice, thank you for putting your point in here too, because I wanted to mention, I should have said faculty, staff, and students should be able to ask questions. The comment that I think it was Kellie made, feel free to take an undergrad class, actually. That's really important too. Go to your right level, whatever your right level is, take a class at that level. I had a couple too that I'm gonna put into the chat before I hang up, but I'll say them now, is Harish said, you gotta learn to deal with rejection. Rejection is okay. You cannot win if you don't play the game. And Glassdoor is something I hadn't heard of before in terms of figuring out salaries. So thanks, Kellie, for that. And the level FYI that Harish mentioned, I didn't know about that either. And then I think that you guys covered it. Those are all my circled elements. So well done, well done. So let's unmute and everybody unmute and clap and thank our speakers very much. Yeah, well done. So feel free to just like sit around and chat if you have time, as if we had time for coffee now together. I wish I could offer you a piece of pizza, which we normally do when we're in person. But yeah.
Well, random thought on Glassdoor, since you mentioned it. Glassdoor's got not just salaries, but also interview questions that have been asked, and you know, they pretty much do, sometimes at least, do align, because interviewers like asking the same questions over and over again. You know, this is mildly unethical, but you got to play the game because everyone else is doing it. And it also has reviews of companies and reviews of jobs once you get to the point when you're hopefully dealing with more than one offer to make that decision.
One thing that I didn't get a chance to say, but I think is worth bringing up is I think it's important to take into account your mental health when you're choosing what to do after school, and also what kind of time frame to do it in. Definitely take time off after school if you want to, and take your time with the job process. It's totally okay to not have something lined up right when you graduate. And it's also great to choose a job that you feel like is going to give you more space to be a healthier version of yourself. I definitely did that, and I am really glad that I did.
Yeah, I would just add, there's sometimes a big perspective shift when you go from like being a graduate student to some sort of non-academic job where you're used to kind of having to work every weekend and feeling pressure to always be, you know, being productive, and you're sort of your own boss and running your own little company of math. And I always see new employees kind of continue that, and you have to tell them like, no, do not work for free. You now are, you know, at somewhere where they pay you like for your time. And you know, make sure you keep a work-life balance that's healthy for you, and you can keep doing for the long run, not the sprint of graduate school.
Yeah, you'll suffer from imposter syndrome again, exactly as you did when you joined grad school, but mental health is important.
Yeah, that's huge. I thought that was worth writing down in the chat as Kellie started that, so we don't forget. Actually, even after you're in your job, I must say I just finished up a year sabbatical. That's the second time I've had sabbatical. Everybody needs a sabbatical from time to time to do things differently. COVID was a strange time to be on sabbatical, but.
Oh, I'll also mention that people can take sabbaticals at my company if we're already used to. I'm super excited. One of my really good friends is going to be taking a sabbatical here this fall, so that's going to be fantastic.
Allison, you didn't talk much about the clearance process, and Henry had to go through a clearance process too, right? Do you want to say a little bit about what that feels like, look like?
Yeah, though I will also mention that they've streamlined it a little bit. And so since I last took it, it's actually easier. And I'll also mention that while you have to be a US citizen, you can become a US citizen and then apply for my job. Like we definitely have people who are not from the United States. But yes, the clearance process. So when I did it, they handed you a stack of forms that was about 2 inches thick. And I think it's now down to 150 pages. And you don't need to fill out all of it, but you need to go through and look and see like what all you do need to fill out. And so you fill that out and then you send that in and then you wait. And then at some point, some people come out and just, poke around, interview some of your friends, maybe meet up with you. And if you're from a small town in Kansas, you will get a lot of phone calls saying, hey, some feds were coming and talking, but don't worry, I didn't tell them anything. And then you have to be like, no, please do talk to them. I'm trying to get a job, please. Yeah. And once that's over, and if that all went well, then you will take a polygraph. And those are very varying degrees of suck depending on who you are. Like I've been in all of mine in under 20 minutes. They suck, but I'm in and out in under 20 minutes. Other people have to take several and they can take over an hour. But I hear that we're slowly moving away from this model. But yeah, that's kind of what the clearance process looks like. And you have to do this approximately every 5 years for the rest of your life. And then you have some lifetime obligations, like reporting foreign travel, reporting foreign contact, or close and meaningful, long-lasting foreign contacts. And you have to go through a pre-pub to, if you're going to publish anything in an outside journal, then it has to go through a review process. But that's not too bad. I continue to publish on the outside and I still give academic talks. And I actually recently got to participate as a project leader in a rethinking number theory workshop this past fall, which was delightful. I think that means I'm officially mid-career.
Actually, just as a quick follow-up, Allison. So I'm doing an internship also at PNNL, just like Kellie did, and where Henry's from. We also have kind of like information release process that you have to go through when you're turning anything out to the lab. I found it's annoying, but not. I mean, maybe it takes a few days or something if you know the right people and pull the right strings. Is that about what you look at CCR as well?
For the most part, every once in a while they get lost, and that can be terrifying.
Yeah.
Sure. But for the most part, it's pretty fast, and there are so many people in my area that like I send it off to the fort, and like one of like 10 people are going to review it, and a couple of them have like they'll send it back with some really nice comments on how they might like redo a slide because, oh, here I think the formatting would be better, or your Tixie is slightly off. Let me just make it prettier for you.
Oh.
So like there's trade-offs.
Very cool.
There is an element of that in like the tech companies too. It's definitely not as strict, but if you are trying to publish something externally, you do have to run it through a kind of review process. So you don't escape it by not being in a government job entirely. Everyone wants to protect their, private algorithms and everything.
Well, awesome job, guys. This was really, really helpful. And maybe we should hang up on a good note, but I really appreciate it. It's really nice to see you all too and see you doing so well in your jobs. I love it.
Yeah, Sarah, sorry.
Please go ahead.
No, Sarah, thank you so much. I mean, it feels super special to have any sort of connection with the math department, and it's just so easy to, drift away. And
no, I'm surprised to hear you say that because, we have like an annual newsletter. Don't you guys get that? Oh, good.
I do, but it does in some ways feel a bit impersonal. It's not like a two-way action. So this has been really nice.
Well, we should do more. Actually, I was planning to host an alumni event at the JMM this year. Yeah, so and if anybody's going to go, but of course, if you're in industry, you might not be going to JMM as often. But we should have some more alumni events. Yeah, I'm going to put that in the hopper and see what we can do about that. Because you're right, we don't want you to feel disconnected. And actually, there's a lot of networking that goes on.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I see lots of people out there, but maybe you don't see all the people that I see.
No, I feel like you're like the one person in the department, Sarah, who's like got everyone on your LinkedIn. And
I wish, actually, I wish I had everyone. There are people, I had to work really hard. I wanted to invite Mary Radcliffe too for this session. And so I just connected with her on LinkedIn. She's working at 538 this year. And I thought, oh, that'd be so cool. We need that too. Actually, she responded in a funny way. She's like, oh, nobody wants to hear what I have to do. I'm like, yes, we do.
Yeah,
We really
absolutely.
do. So I'll keep working on her.